Sentry's Call was one of the very first gear sets released way back in 1.1, alongside Striker, Nomad and Tactician's Authority, and was originally obtainable as a possible reward for completing the new and brutally difficult at the time Falcon Lost Incursion. Originally coming with 15% damage per mark, as well as the fact that marks could be stacked with fully automatic weapons, Sentry was an extremely strong gear set when it was first launched. Even after a few tweaks to make it only work with semi-automatic weapons and to spread the bonuses across 5 gear set pieces instead of 4, it was still considered the strongest gear set in the game up until the major rebalancing that came as part of patch 1.4. But since the release of the classified version during the recent global event Assault back in October, Sentry has once again reinstated itself as one of the strongest PvE sets in the game, at least for group play. There are a couple of ways to build Sentry. You can go with a purely damage focused build, which is what Marco's Sentry video goes for, and that relies on being able to nail pretty much every headshot with a bolt action MMR. Or you can go with a more utility and crowd control focused build, which is overall more beneficial to the team. And that's the build I'm going to be going for in this video. So let's start off by very quickly recapping on the Sentry bonuses. So the 2, 3 and 4 piece bonuses have all stayed the same. So for the 2 piece we get 30% weapon accuracy, for the 3 piece we get an extra 10% headshot damage, and the 4 piece we mark the enemy whenever we get a headshot. Each enemy can receive up to 3 marks, and those marks inflict 5% extra damage on the target for you and for the rest of the team. So when a target's got 3 marks, it's about 16% extra damage that you and the team are going to be doing against that enemy. The 5 piece bonus is an extra 15% weapon accuracy and 15% headshot damage. And the 6 piece bonus, improved Sentry's Call, now allows us to mark the target up to 6 times. And then after 1 mark, every headshot that you hit on a target has a 50% chance to spread a single mark to an additional target within 25 meters. And once you've marked an enemy 6 times, your personal headshot damage on the target is increased by a further 100%. So it's really strong. It allows you to do huge amounts of damage once you've got 6 marks on an enemy. And because the marks do spread quite quickly, you do find that when you're using a sort of a high rate of fire weapon and you're getting a lot of headshots, you do find that those marks do spread quite considerably. So it's really, really useful. You do a lot of damage and your team can do a lot of damage with this gear set. So with the 6 piece bonus, it's clear to see the rapid fire marksman rifles are going to be very good for building up those stacks very quickly on the NPCs. Alternatively, something like the Urban MDR is also very good, given its high rate of fire and high native stability. But the rarity of the Urban MDR makes it very difficult to get the talents that you want, and you might not be able to get hold of one at all. The only downside of running high rate of fire marksman rifles is that without a reclaimer on your team, you're likely to burn through that relatively small ammo pool quite quickly. The Sentry set comes with a very high amount of accuracy built in from the 3 and the 5 piece bonuses. So depending on the marksman rifle you go for, you shouldn't need to stack much more accuracy on the weapon mods. My personal preference for this set is to run 1 Urban MDR and 1 other high rated fire marksman rifle like the SVD or the Scar H. Now, given that marksman rifles already have a very large amount of headshot damage built into their passive bonus, and the fact that you get a lot of additional headshot damage from the 3 and the 5 piece Sentry gear set bonuses, I'd recommend that you don't bother going with headshot damage as a major attribute on your weapon mods. The reason for this is because headshot damage is additive, so the incremental damage increase that you'll get from putting headshot damage on your scope and muzzle isn't going to make that much difference to your overall damage output. For me, the most important thing is to go for mods that allow you to hit as many headshots as possible in quick succession. So either stability mods if you're running with an SVD, or a combination of accuracy and stability if you're running with a Scar H. If you're using an MDR, however, they don't have a huge amount of headshot damage built in already, so you're free to run headshot damage on the scope and the muzzle with an accuracy grip to get the best out of this weapon. Now, you might be wondering why we're not choosing crit chance or crit damage for any of the weapon mods. There are two important reasons why we're not going to be running any crit on this build. Reason number one is that Sentry is purely a PvE focused gear set. The 6-piece bonus is currently completely disabled in PvP. So this means we're going to be stacking enemy armor damage wherever we can on this build, and that means in place of crit chance on the mask and the gloves. Reason number two is that crit damage is additive with headshot damage when it comes to applying to the overall damage calculation. And because we're always going to be going for headshots anyway, the difference between a crit headshot and a normal headshot isn't that much, especially when you compare it to the difference between a headshot and a non-headshot. So this is why we want to maximise our chances of hitting headshots, and we're going to be doing that by stacking accuracy and stability. So now let's talk about weapon talents. Because we're not going for out and out damage, we want talents which are going to be providing us with a utility bonus as well as status effects on the NPCs. The two must-have talents, in my opinion, when it comes to running Sentry are Toxic and Cool-Headed, both of which proc on a headshot. Toxic has a 15% chance to blind an enemy on a headshot, and Cool-Headed gives you a 5% cooldown on your skills and your signature skill on every headshot that you hit. It's not specified in the description, but there is a 3-second built-in delay on Cool-Headed, so you can only proc it once every 3 seconds. Many people wrongly rate Toxic as a terrible talent, but when running legendary missions and heroic incursions, you often find that NPCs spend a lot of time hiding in cover. If you're able to get a headshot on them and proc Toxic, then they're going to stand up flailing their arms about for a few valuable seconds, and that's normally enough time to either be burst down by your teammates or for you to get a full 6 sentry stacks on them, both of which are very useful outcomes. It also works really well on those really annoying shield guys, as it forces them to stand up out of protection of their shield, and again allows you to either get those 6 sentry stacks or allows your team to burst them down. Blind is definitely one of the best status effects in the game against NPCs. If you're running an Urban MDR as a secondary, then you can switch to this when they're blinded and gain the extra 18% multiplicative damage from the MDR's unique talent, Distracted. So that's why we want to run Toxic. And for Cool-Headed, it just makes sense because we're not running any skill haste on the build, so it gives us a nice boost to our skill cooldowns as well as for our signature skill. As far as the third talent goes, there is some freedom here, but you're going to probably want to choose a damage focused talent. Something like Prepared, Destructive, Elevated or Ferocious are probably going to be the best. Steer clear of things like Brutal or Deadly though, because as we've already stated before, we're running over 200% headshot damage, so an additional 12% from Brutal or 15% crit damage from Deadly isn't actually going to make that much difference to our overall damage output. So on my loadout that uses a Scar H, I have Accurate, Cool-Headed and Toxic rolled on the weapon. And that was mainly because that's how the weapon came to begin with. It came with Accurate and Toxic on it. And the Scar H has a lot more base damage than the SVD. The SVD has a lot better handling, but if you can get a Scar H with Accurate on it, that's a really good weapon to run with because Accurate gives it much better handling. It allows you to rapid fire those headshots. And because it comes with more damage, you're just going to be doing more damage every time you hit the enemy. It also has slightly better range, so that's why you should not really ignore the Scar H if it's a possible option for you. On the MDR, we only have 2 available talent rolls, and we're not going to be able to roll Toxic or Cool-Headed because those don't roll on assault rifles. So for this, you're ideally just going to want 2 damage focused talents, or 1 damage plus something like Accurate. On my build, I'm running Destructive and Ferocious. I think it came with Ferocious already, so I rolled off probably a garbage talent for Destructive. And for the weapon mods on the Urban MDR, we can absolutely run with headshot damage on the scope and muzzle. Because we're not already running huge amounts of headshot damage because it's an assault rifle, the extra 30% headshot damage you'll get from the scope and the muzzle is definitely going to make a nice big difference to the damage output. The MDR is quite stable natively, so you don't need to run a stability grip, so I'd recommend an accuracy grip instead. Again, we're not stacking any crit whatsoever on the build, so there's not a lot of point in running a crit damage grip, because we're just not going to be getting that many crits. A good alternative to the Urban MDR if you don't have one is to use a bolt action MMR like an M44 or an M700 Carbon. You're going to want to switch to this once you've already got the 6 stacks on an NPC, as that's going to allow you to deal sort of 3 to 4 million headshots in certain situations. For the bolt action, you're going to want to run pure damage talents. We're not going to worry too much about the utility side, so you're going to want something like prepared and destructive. And unlike the high rate of fire MMR, it's okay to run with headshot damage on this one. We're not going to be gaining that much damage from them, but you don't need any accuracy or stability on a bolt action, so there's very little reason to go with it. So you might as well just go for the VX1 and the Omega Suppressor again to gain that extra little bit of damage. For the pistol, we're going to be running with a First Wave X45 with Toxic and Cool Headed. It's sometimes really useful for spamming headshots onto a boss very, very quickly and to keep them blinded while your teammates burst them down. Also, if you don't have a Reclaimer on the team, then you're quite likely to be running out of MMR ammo at certain points in the mission. So having a high rate of fire pistol with the same talents is really useful in those situations. In terms of stat distribution, you're going to want to go high into firearms, but for me, because I'm running Cool Headed, you're going to want to run one piece of electronics as well. A lot of people don't want to do that these days because generally the overall benefits you're going to get in terms of your the strength of your skills isn't really worth it. But again, because we're running Cool Headed and that is a very useful talent, it's kind of worth it in this situation. If you don't want to roll with Cool Headed and you want to go full firearms, or you want to roll one piece into stamina instead, then you can do that. But you got to remember, your role on the team is primarily to debuff the enemies. So if you go full glass cannon, it's kind of risky as it leaves you with very little sustainability. And then obviously you can't mark the NPCs if you're always being downed. If you're in a group though with a full 9k or 10k Reclaimer, then it doesn't matter too much because they're bound to keep you alive. For the firearms gear mods that we're going to be running, and we're in a slightly unusual situation here, because we're not going to be going for skill haste because we're running Cool Headed, and we're not running crit anywhere, so crit chance mods are also kind of wasted here. But if you're running this in heroic incursions, then you're going to definitely want to use purple firearms and damage to elites mods. And if you're running this in legendary missions, then you could either stick with these, or you could choose plus health for extra survivability, EDR for extra protection against the grenade spam and the agent stickies, or just stick with skill haste for slightly faster cooldowns on your skills. Now on the subject of skills, you're going to want to run the sticky flash mainly for crowd control and to get easy stacks on the enemy, as well as to proc distracted on the Urban MDR for that extra 18% multiplicative damage. It also has a relatively short cooldown, especially when running with Cool Headed, so it's definitely the first choice. Secondly, you're going to either want to run Booster Shot for the damage resilience and damage buff, or Immunizer for the status effect cleanse and that 33% burst heal. For talents, you definitely should run with Combat Medic because you're only going to be running this in a group, and that 40% heal for your teammates every time you use a medkit is priceless. In addition to this, we're going to be running Steady Hands for the huge accuracy and stability buff for 10 seconds after entering cover, which is massively helpful for landing those rapid fire headshots. And then because we're always going for headshots, we're running with Precision for the 12.5% crit chance and 25% crit damage buff. And that applies to the whole team as well, not just us. And then finally, One is None to preserve as much ammo as possible. So those are the key principles of the build, and that's all I'm going to cover in this video. If you're interested in the exact details of the roles of each item, then here are two slight variations on the build, showing all the gear pieces and all the attributes I'm running. I'm going to leave you now with a bit of extra gameplay footage of the build in action, showing just how effective it is for group play. As always guys, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. I tried to keep it as short and to the point as possible, and as a result it took a lot longer to put this together. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do leave me a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more Division content. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer. Take care guys, I'll see you all in the next one.